Do you have absolutely zero sense of self-worth? I know I do, didn't, and for the longest time I struggled to identify a clear path out of the forest of self-contempt. For a while, I thought about cultivating good habits, exercising, eating right, reading, socializing. I thought about doing these things, didn't actually do them. That would be difficult. No, I wanted an easy solution to my woes, and if you're anything like me, today's sponsor might provide you with just the thing you need. The dopamine chip is a subdermal emotional regulator which injects concentrated doses of neurotransmitters directly into your brain. Using the device's companion app, you can schedule regular hits of dopamine to artificially stimulate your natural reward systems without having to put in even an ounce of effort. The dopamine chip, it's like having Twitter permanently implanted in your skull. I sure don't see a problem with that. Good more after Eve night, Cosmoronic number 11. I'm Fring and I hope you're all doing well. So episode 3 of Moon Knight came out last week, and it was a catastrophe, and my expectations for that show going forward are now very low, from completely squandering the incredibly cool Egyptian pantheon to Khonshu apparently having the ability to rewind the cosmos, or I guess otherwise craft an illusion so immense that it covers huge swaths of the earth. Moon Knight is now utterly laden with bad MCU writing, which by now we probably should have come to expect, but I think I can still see that I really did enter into that show on its side, and I think episode 1, for the issues that it presented, there was still a lot of cool aspects to it. It didn't feel as much like every other sort of Phase 4 Marvel project except No Way Home. There were elements of it to latch onto. There were elements of it that were neat. There were ways in which it was presented that was nifty. Our limited POV and a lack of information based on that POV. Little clues and hints in the in his environment, in the way that people reacted to him, that indicated very clearly that there was something amiss. And of course, the strong performance. There were just aspects of what was presented and how it was presented that was really neat, and really left me with the impression that we were gonna be in for something cool. And now with 2, and especially after 3, it's just plummeted straight into MCU sludge. Like the plot has completely fallen apart. I have very little capacity to grasp just how strong Moon Knight is, or what he is able to do, what objectives he's pursuing, and why he's doing them. I mean, you have to come to the conclusion based on basically everything that's happened so far that Mark is not only an ass, but also incredibly incompetent. He just let several opportunities to advance his own ends slip through his fingers. And especially after episode 3, seeing that Moon Knight is apparently, while he's wearing the suit, he can be impaled like 3 or 4 times directly through his chest and abdomen, and he's still fine. Like, it just kind of incapacitates him a little bit, but it doesn't even kill him. Now, I sit here and it's like, what possible reason did you have not to return to the compound to get the Scarab back in London? Why would you pursue them all the way to Egypt? What does it even mean to pursue them all the way to Egypt, but not to have found them? Like, how is that even possible, now that I think about it? Like, couldn't he have just gone back to the compound, watched them, and then followed them right from there? Why does he... Like, what... So, while he's in Egypt and he's chasing some bad guys, and there's the strong implication in this sequence that there is a third personality, that there's someone beyond Steven and Mark, and they're pursuing these guys. It doesn't pan out because Mark is pretty incompetent, and fortunately there are a lot of reflective surfaces in Cairo from which Steven can talk to Mark from, like, conveniently placed mirrors right next to the bad guys he's fighting, to a very shiny reflective blade. It feels like we are encountering some serious contrivance in favor of the choice that they've made to have Mark and Steven only be able to communicate to each other through mirrors, except for like one instance when they're getting into a fight later in the episode. It means that we've just got to find constantly reflective surfaces everywhere. But at the same time, almost failing to recognize that there are a lot of cool opportunities to leverage reflective surfaces. Could it even be that if he stares into someone's eye, that the reflection on the eye could allow Steven or Mark to communicate to each other? That feels like a really cool opportunity, but I'm not sure that we're ever going to see anything like that. In any case, their lead leads nowhere, and so Khonshu's like, I'm going to go summon the gods, and I'm going to do that by doing something crazy. The thing he does is he causes a solar eclipse. Now, this means one of two things. Either he casted an illusion akin to a solar eclipse, which means that he's capable of casting incredibly powerful illusions. I feel like there's a whole raft of problems presented there in terms of world acknowledgement, right? If there is an illusion of a solar eclipse at a time that was not expected, since I'm pretty sure we mapped out all solar eclipses for like the next 100 years, maybe we've even done more than that, I imagine that the world at this point, like Doctor Strange or just any number of people, would be investigating this incident. That is the lesser of the two explanations in terms of problems it presents. The other one is that he physically moved the moon to create a solar eclipse, which I don't think I need to explain how catastrophic that would be, both from a world-building perspective, a powers perspective, a plotting perspective. But in any case, that works, and then the Egyptian gods summon, like, they open, like, a magical portal from just some regular door, and then, Mark goes in, and it's within the pyramids of Giza, and we find out that all of the Egyptian gods, we're not gonna see them presented as they were in the mythology, you know, with really cool designs. Nah, it's just people. The Egyptian gods talk to Mark and Khonshu through their avatars. It's lame. It's super lame. And also, the gods aren't very smart, because the whole point of this conversation is we are going to explain how Ethan Hawke is evil and he's looking for Amit. And I guess when we see Ethan Hawke, he is out in the middle of the desert looking to excavate the tomb. But then he gets his own little portal doorway that leads to the pyramids. Now, I would imagine that the gods have some level of appreciation for where these portals are opening up. Would it not just open up in the desert, like in the middle of the desert, with him just standing there? Do you not have questions for him? Like, what were you doing out in the desert? Oh, you have, like, this tattoo on your arm, and also you've got a walking stick that is based on the appearance of Amit. I wonder if Khonshu might have a point here that maybe you are doing some crazy stuff. Like, Mark does a terrible job of presenting his case. All he needs to do is lay out information like he's leading a cult, they've come here to Egypt to excavate Amit's tomb. Otherwise, ask him what he's doing here. They have their scarab, which will lead directly to the tomb. I have it, and he's got it. He doesn't tell them any of these things. There's like nobody communicates. It's such a bizarre problem that's been plaguing a lot of these MCU projects lately, where people say exactly what they mean while simultaneously failing to communicate really critical information. You know, it's a matter of they would obviously, in this particular instance, Khonshu and Mark would obviously feel compelled to share this important information. There's no reason not to. But they just kind of decide not to, because either they're stupid or they forgot, and the Egyptian gods decide not to look into it further. And also, talking on, like, what feels like a waste of the Egyptian pantheon, I didn't get a clear impression that any of these characters, like any of these gods, had different traits. They all just felt like vaguely kind of stoic, judgmental, kind of like assholes. There was no variation in terms of their ambitions or their temperament. I really don't have a sense of who they are. It's super lame, especially for a pantheon that's super duper unique. I mean, I'm not sure how much I even want to like delve into what happens in this episode. There's a fight scene where Moon Knight, like, he protects Layla, his wife, with his cape, and a bunch of bullets get absorbed into it, and then he like does a twirl and throws the bullets at the bad guys shooting at them. It's really bad. Also, the visual effects have been really wonk. They've been super duper wonk in this show. Like, there's the part earlier in the episode when, he's standing over a cliff to try and interrogate that guy, and then the dude's like, I'm super dedicated, and then chops off the thing that he was grabbing him to and falls to the ground. You got, like, Mark there, overlooking the cliff, and Khonshu, and then the area below. It's all fake, except for Mark. The only real thing is Mark, just composited on. It's all fake. And like, Khonshu looks really weak, but they have him in broad daylight in clear focus frequently. I don't know if it was a problem of a lack of budget or insufficient time to get it all done, but I mean, like, the show looks pretty bad from a visual effects standpoint. The part with the cape, like, if you watch it in slow motion, it looks like the Arkham City, like Batman's cape in Arkham City. Like, it looks really flat. Like, it doesn't look like it's moving like a cape. But, like, this is not a PlayStation 3 video game from 2011. This is a multi-million-dollar Marvel production. What makes me sad about Moon Knight is that of all the upcoming MCU projects, upcoming at the time, I guess now that's coming out, but of all the projects that were coming out this year, it seemed to me like the one most likely to be cool. You know, a new and unique character, because Moon Knight is a cool character from what little I've read about him, and just based on the premise alone, a new and unique character, largely divorced from the broader MCU, couched within an interesting mythos and carried by a phenomenal actor. When you look at everything else that's coming out, from like crazy multiverse shenanigans to a character who has been very inconsistent and Endgame has left him in a pretty bad place, to a sequel that seems to have had a really troubled production, and is probably going to suffer from a lot of the same world building issues as the first one, to a show that is introducing a new character and probably casting aside the original character. You look at all these projects, and I think there's plenty of reason to be concerned about all of them. Whereas Moon Knight was starting in a really strong place, which, funnily enough, the reason why I was optimistic about it was kind of stemming from it being divorced from the MCU, which is the opposite of what is to be expected in terms of what's cool about the MCU. The whole point of the MCU as I could say as an experiment, is that it's a whole bunch of stories connected together with characters interacting with one another and broad overarching plots. That was the unique selling point of the MCU. And I guess to plenty of people who still like the MCU broadly, I guess that there is still a perception that that's there and that it's working and really cool. But like, at this point, it feels like you get you're kind of saved a bit by trying to be as far removed from the broader MCU as possible because of so many of these plot and world building problems. But now, even like the shows, the stakes. I thought this was going to be a low stakes show and a really focused character story. It ain't. The stakes are enormous. Like, oh, sorry, I didn't even mention the craziest part. Like, at the end of the episode, they're out in the middle of the desert they're using a star map that they pieced together from a tomb, and what they realize is, oh, the stars have drifted in the last 2,000 years. The night sky isn't quite the same. Now, I know that the stars move, obviously, because the cosmos is always moving around, the solar system is moving within the galaxy, and the galaxy is moving around, and of course, like, the speeds at which these things are moving is tremendous because it's space, but space is also really big. I don't know that 2,000 years is long enough for there to be a significant change, but I actually don't know. So I can buy that it's significant enough that it would cause problems for them. The whole point of the map is that it's going to lead them to the tomb, its tomb. Like, the maps were drawn from the location of the tomb. But here's the thing, I would imagine that there's probably resources online. There's probably resources online that can help you out, you know, that probably know exactly where the stars were 2,000 years ago. And also, you know, you're with a dude who was alive. Khonshu was alive 2,000 years ago, so he probably remembers it. And, so, in order they deduce, oh no, we're stuck. We can't find Amit's tomb. And Khonshu's like, I got an idea, bro. Do as I do. And then he puts his hands in the air, and so does Steven. And they move the stars to where they were 2,000 years ago so that they could triangulate Amit's tomb. Now, much like with the solar eclipse subject, there are one of two explanations for what happened here. Either this was an incredibly elaborate illusion, which, if this is something that Khonshu was able to do based on his memory, surely he would have just been able to recall where the stars were. But the thing is that this illusion is cast, it's all in Cairo, they all see it. And I'm not sure that it would be implausible to deduce that this is happening on a global scale, but in any case, this is another very elaborate illusion. That already poses plenty of problems in that, at this point, if the solar eclipse didn't do it, all of the magical authorities in the MCU are coming to investigate this. And again, if this is the explanation, this is the less stupid one. The other one is that they rewinded the universe. The whole universe, everything, the whole cosmos. They rewinded Earth, the solar system, all of the stars in the sky, all of the photons that they were sending, because remember, all of the light that reaches us is as old as, it's as light years, it's the distance in light years in years. I don't know why that would be so... This is incredibly hard to explain such a very simple concept. Light doesn't move instantaneously. It takes a long time on a cosmic scale to get to where it needs to go. So, in order for the night sky to be as it was, you would have to be, rewinding the photons that have already come here to be as they were 2,000 years ago based on where all of the stars and all of the galaxies and nebulas that I imagine you could see, beyond just the ones you could see with your blind eye in the night sky, but also with telescopes, would have to be done too. It's insane. Or rewinding the Earth's... It seems to imply that it's rewinding the Earth's spin with these big light trails. But that's... rewinding the Earth isn't gonna do shit. What does that even mean? And how does that not, fling everybody off the planet? Are you rewinding the planet? And also, what about stars that don't exist anymore? They've gone up in supernova, which have definitely happened and have been visible to Earth. Are those stars reformed temporarily? That can't be it. But, I don't know that the illusion makes any sense as an explanation either. It's almost as if, the people who made the show don't realize that the night sky isn't a static object plastered against the sky. That it's not just a bunch of lights and dots plastered against the atmosphere of our planet. That it is space. It's the universe. It's everything. That was insane. And I guess, I'd already kind of lost hope before that point, but at that point, it's holy fuck. So yeah, Moon Knight couldn't escape the trappings of Phase 4 MCU writing. Now, of course, we're only halfway through, and the next 3 episodes could turn things around, but I really have no reason to think that they will. We'll see. I doubt it. I know this announcement is a few weeks old, but I don't get much news down in my dungeon. E3 2022 has been cancelled. There will be no in-person or online expedition. That's kind of a big deal. It's so much of a big deal that I didn't talk about it for 3 weeks because it kind of just came and went as a news item in my mind. I feel like, I guess if you're like me and you've been pretty disengaged from E3 for a while, something worth noting is that in the wake of COVID, I believe E3 was cancelled in 2020 and 2021 in favor of an online expedition. So it wasn't really cancelled, it was still on. But this time around, it's just not happening at all. No in-person or online expedition, no showcases, no conferences. It's just not happening. There will be another one in 2023, according to the ESA, the organization that puts it on. But that's for this year. For as much as many of us have grown apathetic to E3 over the years, this is something of a big deal. It represents a paradigm shift which has been coming for a while. And I think that there's plenty to pull from it as somebody who is not. Like, I'm not upset that E3 is being cancelled. I'm pretty apathetic to it. It doesn't really mean a whole lot in terms of the event itself, but I am interested in, I think, what it represents in terms of changes in the industry overall. Despite my many misgivings with the event, E3 did used to be a big deal. Like, people got excited about E3 because there were always big expectations, and there was always an expectation for big announcements. I remember the cycle. There'd always be, in the lead up to E3, people would be talking about what they expected based on rumors and mumblings. And I think it's kind of hard to get past that on some level, you're always going to generate some level of interest and excitement in an event that is essentially, hey, like, the whole industry has converged here to announce all of their projects. Like, every year you'd get new big announcements, updates on games that were coming out. And then, of course, during, years in which new consoles would be revealed, there was always super high expectations in terms of what people could expect from those platforms. I don't think it's any surprise that E3 was always something that was really, that excited people, even though I think it was, partially fed by, like, the news cycle, because the whole point of E3 is it's not like an event that fans attend. I think that changed in recent years, but I mean, for the longest time, it was press. It's just for press and industry to get together and report on stuff, as opposed to, like Gamescom or PAX, which are more, or even Tokyo Game Show, in which the public can also attend. But I mean, putting to one side that people do get hyped about E3 and did, I think E3's always been a pretty bad event. You just think about all of the things that you typically get at E3. Vertical slice demos, which don't reflect the final game. Pre-rendered trailers, which became a really... Well, I mean, there's always been pre-rendered trailers. Of course, there was the issue in the past where you'd have, like, pre-rendered trailers that were just flat out not the game. That seems to have subsided in favor of, what was a trend for what feels like a decade at this point of CGI trailers for announcements for games that are not coming out for like 2+ years. That became, and a lot of games that just never came out. That was a big problem for Microsoft, especially. I remember there were a few games like Scalebound, and then 2 years later it gets cancelled. I think there was another game like Phantom You can tell how old my references are in terms of how little I've engaged with E3 in recent years, pulling from like 2013, 2014. But I mean, that was, CGI trailers to get people hyped for a premise, not even any gameplay at all. Even worse than a vertical slice, really. Really bad press conferences. Again, I'm going to show the age of my references here. Sony 2006, Nintendo 2008, Microsoft 2010, to name the most notorious ones. I remember 2014 was a pretty weak year. That was a pretty weak year, I remember that much. And then the rest of it becomes a bit of a haze. And E3 is kind of emblematic of a culture within gaming that I think is really detrimental to players, and to some extent detrimental to developers as well, which is hype culture, getting people really hyped, setting expectations super duper high, that in some cases are just, you're never gonna reach. Not only from a graphical perspective, I think that's the obvious one, but even from a gameplay one. You think about, Watch Dogs is the notorious one. Like, Watch Dogs, the game that we got, and Watch Dogs, the game that was presented at that E3 2012 demo, it just ain't, it ain't the same. It's not the same. Like, that is not the game. Ubisoft's had this problem as well, where The Division had this demo that was, like, graphically and in terms of features just didn't align with what the final game was. There was such a pressure with E3 and, like, what it was as a show to stand out and be the coolest thing ever, and to latch on to that hype early, that I wouldn't be surprised if it just led to these really bad practices in terms of trying to present the best thing possible, regardless of whether it's ever going to be emblematic of the final game, because you want to make a good first impression, especially when this is an event that is shared by the entire industry. You don't get time to shine if you don't come out and make a really impressive demo, because if you don't, there's going to be like 50 other games that you're competing with. And I mean, it worked, because I remember like Watch Dogs. Everybody's talking about Watch Dogs. Everybody thought Watch Dogs looks awesome. That Watch Dogs looked awesome. Everybody thought it looked awesome. The Division Rainbow Six Siege. Everybody was hyped for those. But I mean, I feel like none of them really lived up to the expectations. And I'm sure there are other ones that are eluding my mind right now, but it's definitely, it was a problem. I guess it's just, you think about the format of E3 that, hey, this game has about 5 minutes to kind of show off what it is as quickly as possible on a stage that's shared by many, many other games. Just doesn't seem like the best way to present whatever it is that you're making, especially when, in a way, enforced by gamers, like an attitude that was very much bolstered by gamers. There was a sense of competition. Who won E3? There was always that sentiment. Who won E3? You know, and if you come out with like some crazy trailers to showcase your games, it's like, that's the thing that gets you to win E3. More so than announcements. Though then again, people were receptive to even CG trailers more so. Not more so, but similarly to like proof of concept. All I'm saying is I think that E3 as an event overall fostered a lot of bad attitudes that resulted in E3 kind of having a reputation that developed over time of, I don't know that you can really believe anything that you see here. And there were things that were presented at E3 that weren't, you know, bullshit, right? There were absolutely things presented at E3 that were real demos or like cool trailers that revealed details about a game that were accurate. Nintendo typically avoided this problem because graphics isn't a huge focus for Nintendo, and Nintendo also kind of had a long-standing tradition of announcing games pretty close to their release, whereas definitely in like the Microsoft, Sony, Ubisoft camp, there was much more of a willingness to announce shit really early, like 2 years early, way before the game could even come out. And I don't know that it's even realistic that like 2 years before the game is ready to ship that you can build a demo that's going to be hyper reflective of the game. And something I've learned a little bit more in recent years, as I've gotten a bit of a better understanding of like game development and how it works, vertical slice demos are they're a big investment. Like a vertical slice demo takes several months of work that could be dedicated to building the core game instead of having something that you're going to play live on stage that needs to work to some extent, that is going to be something that you can't necessarily translate over into the main game effectively and build on top of. I was rewatching the Halo 2, like the behind the scenes making of Halo 2, and one of the big parts of that behind-the-scenes documentary was that Bungie spent a lot of time building their E3 2003 demo, and it was a really cool demo, but it was just a demo. It wasn't a game from which they could build levels. There was a lot about it that just wasn't easily translated into the game. And so when they came back from E3, they really struggled to continue to do work on the game. And I mean, that's a big, you know, spending time to put these demos together, which to some extent is going to be necessary because publishers want people to know what games are coming out. They want them to have an idea of what their game's going to be. They want to get them hyped. But, I don't know, it feels like it is the source of a lot of resource crunch. But E3's been dwindling in relevance in recent years. I don't know that if there are concrete numbers on this, but I mean, based on my anecdotal engagement with online gaming communities, it seems like E3's relevance has been dwindling for a while, like even long before COVID disrupted the event. I think that this began before like even Sony stopped attending the events and EA did their own adjacent event. It feels like it began well before that, like maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Before that, E3 was like the big deal always. There was so much focus on it. Maybe stemming from less press that would be able to report on things and disseminate information on a consistent basis. E3 being recognized in industry, like as the conglomeration of all of the press and all of the industry coming together to talk about stuff at a time when YouTubers and I guess more direct lines of communication between publishers and the gamers, when those were less available, maybe there was much more of a need for E3, that it was a really good way to get information out there especially because everybody was there. Like, it gave everybody an opportunity to get in and talk about it. But it feels like, in the wake of, I guess, the democratization of gaming news with, like, smaller press outlets, publishers holding their own events, YouTubers who are focused on specific games getting access to those games, feels like all of those factors combined together helped contribute to the event's dwindling relevance, almost leaving E3 as an event that was antiquated in its format. I think Nintendo Direct pioneered what will likely take E3's place going forward. Online streams held by publishers at a time of their choosing, where they can talk about the games that they want, in the wake of which only their games will dominate the headlines. There's no need to compete for space against Sony or Microsoft or Ubisoft if Nintendo just says, hey, we're doing an event tomorrow to talk about our, like, games for the next quarter. Like, it makes a lot of sense, E3, like, Nintendo Direct, which is kind of funny, because I remember when Nintendo Direct started, like, 2012, 2013, that a lot of people didn't like it. They thought that there was an absence of the hype culture that was generated from live in-person press conferences. But I mean, Nintendo Direct is a really good format. It's a direct stream of information, and they've changed it now to where there will even be games that have specific events, and that's really cool, because it's like, you get 30 minutes of just, hey, let's go over the game in exhaustive detail so you have a really good understanding of what the game is. That's way better. That's way better than, like, having to do a 5-minute vertical slice where you need to try and cram all that information into, yeah, like a 5-minute slot. Having that as an option, Nintendo Directs often had way less fat because you didn't have to deal with people coming up on stage and giving their long speeches, audience cheers and stuff like that. You could really just expedite the process and go through them really quick, which is preferable, you know, like, it's just not wasting people's time, really. Though, of course, you don't have to watch the press conferences. I mean, a lot of people just wait until afterwards to see what all of the announcements are. But I mean, people will tune in for the whole of a Nintendo Direct just because it's really quick. And now we've seen that, you know, Sony has taken to essentially doing the same thing as Nintendo Direct in State of Play. I have noticed, though, occasionally watching those streams that I get the distinct impression that unlike, I guess, the broad Nintendo audience, the broad PlayStation audience doesn't quite yet understand that whenever there's going to be a State of Play, you're not meant to expect, like, the biggest, craziest announcements ever. I remember I watched one where I think Sony had explicitly said we're focusing on Japanese-developed games at this one. And then you still had people, like, in chat, Spider-Man 2, you know, God of War Ragnarok. Like, it feels like, less, like, with the Nintendo ones, there's now kind of an expectation that you're only ever really gonna see what's coming out in the next few months. And if you get anything more than that, then that's really cool, but you know that that's what you're getting. The expectations have been really set by Nintendo, whereas Sony is still fighting against what is the E3 culture of big announcements. There's meant to be big announcements every time you do a stream, right? But I mean, nevertheless, the format is probably preferable because it means that but Sony has done their like showcase stream, and those streams have like all the big announcements and dominate the headlines. And you don't have to compete against Microsoft or EA or Ubisoft or any of those guys. You can just kind of have your own event that is all over the news for, you know, for like the next week. Though I will say on that, chat has reminded me that I don't know why I forgot about this, but it is true that with Nintendo Directs, there was often expectations of like Smash content or Zelda. Like people always getting mad when there was no Smash. Yeah, I did forget about that. Yeah, actually, yeah, now that I've been reminded, I remember there was a lot of, like, where's Smash, and especially, though, with Zelda one, you know what, it's fair. That game got announced, like, 3 years ago. It's coming out next year. That's a long time to wait, to find out information about a game. And that is a matter of, it feels like Nintendo announced it a little too early. It feels like, especially in a live service dominated landscape, 1 or 2 big events every year is just seems a bit antiquated. You know, people want steady updates regularly rather than one big blowout. I think for as much as people hype up and really like those massive blowout streams where there's a whole bunch of announcements, I think that people want to know things more regularly. In part because there's reason to want to know things more regularly because a lot of games get regular updates. And when you think about a lot of the games that are dominant in the current gaming landscape, right? These live service multiplayer games that have seasons every few months, kind of makes sense that they aren't really part of the E3 hype machine anymore, that they're their own thing. But I mean, nevertheless, it's, I think it's just, people expect more updates more regularly. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just get the impression that E3 as an event has attracted less and less attention over the years. And that, all that COVID has done in terms of being disruptive for in-person events has maybe hastened the demise of a show that was already on its way out. Which I guess leaves us with a question: can E3 and similar events make a comeback? I mentioned it before, but the ESA has indicated they want to hold an E3 2023, but really, it's more so about whether both the industry and gamers find value in E3 itself. Both Nintendo and Sony haven't actively participated in E3 for a while. EA's event that they've been doing for a few years is like E3 adjacent. It starts on the weekend. It's not like a part of the event itself. So now, at least for the last couple of years, it's mainly just been Microsoft and a few publishers. That's about it. I'm not sure that like E3 persists as it was before. I don't see that happening. I never see it being as big as it was. I don't know that there would be much reason for Nintendo or Sony to abandon their live streams in favor of having another E3 show. I especially imagine now that they have seen a utility to it, particularly Nintendo, considering they've been doing it for nearly a decade at this stage, a utility in doing their own show around about the same time, but not quite. That I would be surprised if they ever sort of return to just be active participants in E3. Can't say that I'm that curious to see if E3 makes a comeback in the next few years. There are other events, and personally I enjoy the Nintendo Direct format more than E3, in part because at least I enter into those streams with lower expectations. I'm sure some people get too excited. In fact, they absolutely do. I don't ever see E3 being what it used to be, but we'll have to see how things pan out in the coming years. We got a federal election coming up in Australia in just over a month, and because of that, I've been thinking a lot about bias lately. Don't worry, I have absolutely no intention of discussing any specific politicians, parties, media outlets, or events. I'm not in the mood. It's a little too early. I'm not in the mood to haplessly navigate into a minefield today. It's more the topic of bias itself that interests me, and, you know, I guess it's just arisen in the wake of the lead up to this election. I've been thinking about bias, because of the election. I've been thinking about it. Perspectives, how they develop, the information that we have access to, how we interpret it, how we communicate it, what we look for. Like, how biases develop. And I'm not speaking, like, strictly in a negative sense. I think we can obviously think about pretty clearly bad biases. Obviously, like, biases on the basis of race or gender. But, like, biases extend beyond those clear ones. I guess it's like, it's more so the concept of biases and perspectives that I've been thinking about broadly. I've partly been thinking about it, you know, as sort of an introspective effort. When you look at an election cycle or any particular political cycle, it's really interesting to see how people who are diametrically opposed can so vehemently disagree even in the face of facts that are, like, unchanging and, like, a single set of facts, a totally different takeaway. And I think, you know, you sit there and be like, well, that makes perfect fucking sense. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? People have different life experiences. People have different values that inform what they care about and what they're focused on and their perception of any given facts. But I guess I'm just interested in sort of the underlying thing that's informing that in myself and basically all people. Though obviously I can't speak for, like, how all people interpret reality. I'm not a mind reader. The topic's just been interesting me, that's all. How is it that we develop our perspectives? How much are we, as individuals, responsible for developing our own worldview when factoring in, you know, societal and social pressures, information asymmetry? Like, how much are we really a fully autonomous, rational agent navigating through, like, a sea of information and coming to correct, sound conclusions on the information that we have? Or, like, I guess more broadly, developing our perspective on the world and what we value. Feels like, we give ourselves a lot of credit as individuals that, like, we've got it figured out, we've got all the right information, we've got the right ideas for how the world ought to be, and that the people who don't are, like, dramatically wrong and stupid and evil, and that these things can be said almost without, like, a shred of like, irony, like, just a total lack of awareness, I guess, of that the other people probably think the same thing of you. And almost feels like an unwillingness to consider that leads to gridlocks where, like, nobody can ever make any common ground or headway on anything. It's like, well, someone's got to give, but the reality is it's an immovable object and a unstoppable... Wait, fuck. What is it? An unstoppable force meets an immovable object. That's the one. And I guess, almost, the way that I try to develop a perspective on something is to boil it down to some kind of fundamental that I can extrapolate to more varied situations, like some sort of core principle, and then build it up from there. I think that's really hard, and I can't say that I've got it fully figured out. I think that would be incredibly cocky, and I think it can be very easy for that not to happen. I think it can be really easy based on what is the focus of the news cycle at the time, or the focus of the people who surround you, or your political opponents, or ideological opponents, or whatever the case may be, that you can settle into a position without any underlying principle supporting that position. Like, you hold it because the team that you think you're a part of should hold that position. And then after a decent amount of time, you just come to the conclusion, yeah, this is my perspective, and it is a true perspective that is well informed, principally, and based on the information that's available to me. But is it? How do you even recognize when that's the case, you know? How do you know when it's a perspective that you've sat down, thought about, and developed on your own, rather than one that's been told to you by people you know, or people who you're aligned with broadly, or media outlets, or just something that you've stumbled by mistake, or that might just be informed by, like, some deep-seated, subconscious, irrational thought process that's really hard to work through? You know, like, the thoughts that arise in your head, I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm pretty sure the idea is that the conscious thoughts you have, like the thoughts that pop into your head that you identify as the thinker, like the person who thinks the thoughts, or not the person who thinks the thoughts, but the person who perceives that you've thought those thoughts, if that makes any sense, that those thoughts arrive there from a subconscious process that's happening that you don't really recognize. A process that is informed by your history, your experiences, your strengths and weaknesses, the things that you're afraid of, the things that you are excited about, that process is happening all on its own, that I'm not even sure that you as a person can even work through that. Like, that you can't just sit down and work through that on your own. And how much that's going to inform your entire life, or at least your entire thought process. And so what I wonder is, like, if that process exists, you know, surely that's going to have an influence on the information which makes its way to us. It is so tremendously important how we decide to get our information, and even more importantly, why do we choose to care about certain things? And do we really care about these things? Are these interests also influenced by our friends, family, social, society, media? Because it's not, you know, like, oh boy, I don't, like, the truth, right? What is the truth? Like, really? I guess everybody would say that, like, the truth is an accurate portrayal of events, but it's like, but is it the totality of events? Like, if you were to say, this person did, like, a press conference and they talked about this, do you also report on the exact, like, number of trees that were behind them, or how hot or cold it was that day, or how many people were in attendance, or how many, like, particles of any given elements were just around? Like, there's always going to be an amount of information that's going to be omitted, just by the fact that there's only so many words that you can print on a page. There's only so long that a news report can be. There's only so long that you, if you were there, are going to be paying attention to these things. And also, like, if you're present, what's the shit that you don't notice? Everybody's always going to be focused on different things that are going to be informed on, like, you know, how they interact with the world. Are you more of a visual person? You're a person who's focused on audio. You not only have to think about information that makes its way to you through the perspective of the person who got the information, but also like the information they either chose to or subconsciously chose to keep or omit. And then when you read it, that you chose to read that particular news source, that you chose to be interested in that particular topic, and that you're going to be coming into it, reading it with whatever biases you have, on top of whatever biases may well have come through in whatever piece of information you're going through. Like, how in the world do you as an individual effectively navigate through such a crazy landscape? Especially when like, you know, how the fuck are you meant to figure that out, right? Like how are you meant to sort that out? Like, how can you ever escape that? I've been reading for what feels like a really long time a book called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. And one of the things that's talked about in that book is that something of a human conundrum that we have is that we are animals. Like, we are biological beings in the same way as a dog, or a lion. I like how I'm going to all the boring ones. A lion, a bear, a praying mantis. Obviously, we're different, right? We're obviously different. But fundamentally, we are biological beings. We're born, we grow up, we eat shit, sleep, and we die. But we are the only beings, as far as we can tell on this planet, who have the capacity to recognize our condition, because we're capable of abstract thinking, we're self-aware, and then that sort of leaves us with a burden in the sense that, almost like our minds transcend what we are physically, but they are nonetheless bound by it necessarily. Something that is interesting to me about that as a thought is if we want to approach something and try to go for some level of impartiality, or I guess objectivity, in terms of moving through navigating the world and trying to understand information and come to rational conclusions, is it even possible for us to escape all of those biases or processes that are going on that create these problems in the first place? You know, is it even possible for us to do that? And if it's not possible, what the fuck do we do, right? Like, I guess the best thing after that would be to develop some sort of framework as rationally as you can that is going to be helpful for you in terms of just understanding information, understanding biases, and kind of like working through the sea of information to come to sound principled conclusions on things. But like, how can you even trust that whatever framework that you made isn't encumbered by any of those issues? Could it be said that there's some sort of emotion belying a desire to create some sort of, I guess, clinical way to interpret information rather than funneling these things through your emotional responses? You've developed emotional responses for a reason. They have some level of utility. When you make the choice to almost try and ignore those, are you losing something? How do you even know that the framework you've made? And what about if it's just on any given day, right? If you're in a shit mood one day, you could try and use the framework, but you're still going to end up coming to, you know, totally different conclusions and possibly forming biases. I don't know. That's just, like, I guess that's the best you could do, but how do you even know that that's good enough? But what even is good enough in this case, you know? I guess the reason why all of these thoughts were prompted was kind of to, I guess to try and hone in on what I would consider to be something of an important question. How do we recognize biases within ourselves? You know, how do we distinguish between a well-reasoned, rational thought that is belied by our principles and a bias, an irrational, unreasonable bias that has been cultivated, you know, over the course of potentially years? This to me seems like a huge challenge that can only really be overcome with significant amounts of introspection. And even then, I don't know that that fixes anything. I hope that it does. I'm kind of the perspective that it's really important to like analyze yourself and try and figure out why you have the habits that you do, or the mindset that you do, or the principles that you do, to see if they're like properly informed, to test your principles with, you know, difficult questions, to sort of, I guess, rigorously analyze yourself. I think that there is a lot of value in that. I can't say that that's the case for everybody, and I certainly wouldn't say that I think it's easy, but it seems like that's like a good practice to have. I guess the problem is it's like, how do you trust that? And how do you how do you like reconcile that with other people? Like how do you know? Because I don't know that you can pull this all from yourself. Like, you know, humans are social creatures. We rely on other people to some extent. How much do you rely on the perspectives of others to inform your approach to all of this? If everybody's telling you that you're wrong, like, is that something that's worth taking on board just for that? Or is it even, you know, or is it... I don't know. I'm not sure. But I guess, you know, all of this is about how do we rectify these biases, and how do we know that in doing so we don't end up cultivating new biases? Maybe that's like the core of what I've been finding interesting, but also kind of difficult about thinking about all this. I'm often find myself fascinated by how it is that people can so easily oscillate between different political and philosophical persuasions without like ever identifying like the core in themselves, like the core that's causing this sort of radical changes in like what is your outwardly perceived persuasion and attitude, but seemingly like nothing's changed at its core. You know, whether that be like a lack of conviction or a preference for belonging to a community rather than reaching a sound conclusion on a given topic. I don't want to get political, famous last words, but like it's just something I've noticed, especially in terms of online politics, is it really feels to me like a lot of what is informing that, and, you know, I guess in a certain sense, informing massive amounts of bias in a lot of people, is belonging to a club, right? Belonging to a community, having a sense of place, and I guess common purpose. And that like people can very easily sort of oscillate between whatever's popular or whatever makes them feel best without ever kind of working through that core process to figure out what it is they really believe, why they believe it, and to try and root out any aspects of their worldview or approach that are irrational or stupid, I guess, or ill-informed, or may well be rooted in some sort of experience that they've had. But here's the thing, though, like, Is it possible to operate without biases? I suppose it depends on how broadly we use the word. Like, if bias has a negative connotation that it is, like, irrational or prejudicial or ill-informed perspective, like, then surely we'd want to get rid of those, right? But if biases just mean a perspective at all that may differ from somebody else, which surely it would have to, right? Because everybody's opinion on what is controversial or what is right or wrong is going to vary from person to person. So if we're just talking about, like, is it possible to operate without perspectives? I feel like the answer to that question has to be no, right? Like, I don't even know what that means to not have a perspective as a human being. Like, if you as a human being, I guess, value continued existence, which it seems like the vast majority of people do, then if that's what we count as a perspective, then it's probably impossible to not have one. I guess it depends on how broadly we want to talk, but I guess in a more colloquial sense, that is a question that I'm kind of finding interesting. You know, how do we develop a framework with which we can approach the world rationally? Is it even possible to account for all of these subconscious processes going on in our heads that feed into our behavior? Is that even possible? If it is something that has developed in human beings naturally over the course of like 100, 200,000 years, there's got to be some utility in it. I mean, something that's been talked about is that something from where a lot of issues stem from humans is that when we lived as hunter-gatherers, there were a lot of utilities to the behaviors that we cultivated that don't quite work as well now in the modern world that we live in. So, for instance, pattern recognition was hugely valuable in hunter-gatherer days. The ability to quickly identify what are things that are good for you and things that are dangers, that was something that was super important. These quick judgments, very quick judgments, that may well have been wrong, generally erred on the side of keeping human beings alive. Now, it seems like that process causes problems for us, that we can jump to really conclusions that really aren't sound, and we do so quickly relying on a mental process that doesn't have the same utility anymore now that we don't live in a landscape where, you know, every day is a fight for survival. Of course, our desire to belong to social groups and to achieve social cohesion, that's super duper important. And I feel like it would not be a stretch to say that that process, that desire in most humans is the reason why people can so dogmatically become entrenched in whatever position they have, more so on the basis of belonging and maintaining social cohesion, more so than because they really believe it. Or maybe it is that they really believe it just by virtue of this process, but it's not healthy, it's not productive or good. But like, these processes have to have some utility, right? Or maybe they don't. Maybe they are entirely worthless and need to be overcome, but I don't know if it's that simple. You may have noticed that for this topic, I've mainly been asking questions and thinking aloud, because I have absolutely no clue how to reconcile all of this. This is like a big topic that honestly feels like it's kind of beyond my my means at the moment. I'm working on it though, but I find it interesting. I think all that really prompted this was, it is interesting to me, but also a little bit concerning, how readily people can look at somebody who has, through whatever life experiences or societal pressures or information that they've gotten, formed a conclusion that they believe in just as much as the other person, that they can so easily be like, ha, what a fucking idiot. Not like me, you know? Like, that surely there's got to be a point where it's worthwhile to go, well, wait a minute, what if I'm wrong? Like, what if I've made a mistake? What if I've gotten the wrong information? What if I haven't identified what's belying this perspective? You know, what if I'm wrong? I think that's important to just, if there is any way to cap this off, I think that it is important to think about that, you know, from time to time. What if I'm wrong? What if there's something I'm missing? Some piece of information I'm missing? What if there's some kind of subconscious bias operating here that I need to reconcile? What if there's something that I can learn from talking to this person? Or just, you know, thinking about it a little bit more. Like, what if I'm wrong? Not necessarily with the attitude of, oh, I'm definitely wrong, I'm a fucking idiot, I got everything wrong, everything that I thought is bullshit. Because it feels like if you have that attitude, you can easily oscillate between, like, incredibly fucking stupid positions. But more so just a process of, you want to be rigorous with yourself, I think. Rigorous with your own positions, test them, throw examples at them, throw analogies at them, see how they hold up, and where that you feel like they don't hold up, where there's something that just doesn't quite make sense in terms of a position. Not necessarily that it's like a disaster or that it's completely wrong. It's just that there may be something there that needs to be reconciled. And it feels like, you know, only good can come from that. At least in my opinion. But hey, maybe that's a bias of my own, right? I don't know, just food for thought. That does it for me this week. Thank you very much for hanging out. This was Cosmoronic number 11. I'm Fringy, and I will catch you all next time.